Good morning. I'm Tarun Khanna, professor at Harvard Business School, where for the past 25 years or so, I've been studying the role that entrepreneurs and creative individuals play in fostering economic development in the developing countries around the world. And I'm here today for a very specific purpose. I want to promote my new book. It's called Trust, Creating the Foundation for Entrepreneurship in Developing Countries. Uh, I'm just going to call it Trust rather than the mouthful of the title. And I'm here with my colleague Gregory Fortier, who's facing me and has kindly agreed to pose some questions to me so that I can give you a sense of what the book is about. And I'm really glad that you've taken the time to join me. These are questions that folks have posed to me as I'm wandering around the country and the world, talking about this book, talking about my research, about my practical activities as an entrepreneur myself in the developing world, and really enjoying that process. I'm hoping to share some of that with you.
So Tarun, tell us about your new book.
So as I said, the new book is called Trust. What it does is it puts the entrepreneur in the center of the process of economic development. I think this is really vital because ultimately creative progress comes from the aggregation of actions of people like you, me, many others around us. Not that everyone has to be an entrepreneur, but I think it's important for everybody to understand what it takes to be an entrepreneur, what it takes to be creative in solving local problems. I think the idea that's been quite discredited now over the past 3 or 4 or 5 decades is the proposition that outsiders, folks outside from a particular milieu or context, outside a particular country, can solve the problems of that country. It has to ultimately come from local problem solving. And the task of the policymaker, of the academics, of people providing capital and other resources is to think about how to make this process more efficient. So that's what the book is about. It's trying to say if you're a would-be entrepreneur, or you want to invest in a would-be entrepreneur, or you want to understand the actions of an existing entrepreneur, what are some of the issues that should be front and center for you at a practical level? I like to say in the book that the central message of the book is that individual agency matters. Now that's a jargony term. All it means is that the individual should take responsibility for his or her ambiance and for addressing the problems around them. And you know what? It's very exciting because there's so many things that need to be done. The upside is tremendous, both in the sense of societal progress and potentially in the sense of individual success, wealth, whatever it is that might motivate you. And most people are motivated by a combination of those things. So I'm excited to put the individual back at the center of the economic development process. And the book basically argues that since problem solving is very hard, particularly in these contexts for an individual to pull off, it is incumbent on him or her to bring together a variety of folks to collectively solve these problems. And that's where the idea of trust comes in. Without that soft factor of trust, it's hard to get people together when you don't have formal rule of law, you don't have reliable information, you generally have endemic instability coexisting with massive opportunity. Trust is the foundation that makes it possible for people to come together to not just create, but to create the conditions to create. And that's the phrase that I love to use to describe the book, that the entrepreneur can no longer be just, if you will, a domain specialist. He or she has to be able to solve ancillary problems that occur around the central issue that they're trying to address, because without that, you don't have the conditions for a venture to thrive.
And why did you decide to write it?
I'm primarily an academic. I've been at Harvard as a student and then a faculty member for 3 decades, and most of my time is spent in this office. You're seeing a little vignette of it, and engaging with my students who come from all over the world and enroll in the universities in Boston, at Harvard primarily, but also MIT and the other institutions around here. But I'm also, by nature and predisposition, very happy to be out in the real world, mixing it up with ordinary folks and doing interesting things. And I'm privileged to be at a world-leading university like this one, which is sort of a crossroads of ideas and so on. So this is my attempt to take ideas that are nurtured in an academic setting, in the Harvard classroom, and take them out to the world and expose them to illumination, if you will, from a variety of audiences. I'm set to go to places as far apart as Santiago, Sao Paulo, London, New York, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai, Tokyo in just the next 6 months. And so that's going to be a pretty crazy schedule. But what I'm most looking forward to is just meeting people on this journey and talking about it. But the reason I wrote the book ultimately, Trust, is to take the ideas from academic practice, to bring them to the attention of folks like you who are watching this video, presumably, and to invite you to participate with me in the subsequent evolution of these ideas.
When did you begin your work on trust, and how long did it take?
So I never set out to write a book on trust per se. I set out many years ago to think about what it takes for an entrepreneur to succeed in a developing country, which is generally a compromised environment in the sense that the supporting institutions that a would-be entrepreneur would need to support her new venture are generally, if not missing, then underdeveloped. You can think of the provision of risk capital, you can think about adequate services to find the right kind of talent at the right time. You can think of ambient stability in the macroeconomic or political environment. You can think of the institutions that make sure that politicians don't act arbitrarily, if you will, checks and balances. You think of a free press. These things are generally underdeveloped, and that makes the very practical task of an entrepreneur exceedingly difficult. And those difficulties coexist with the massive opportunities that are just waiting for people to find a way to act upon. So I started to study that process 2 decades ago or more. As I said earlier, this book is an attempt to synthesize some stories with which I've had the good fortune to be involved for the better part of a decade in some cases, sometimes even longer, to try to pull together what I thought I learned. And my reflection over the last couple of years, the writing has proceeded in fits and starts over 2 years, but my reflection led me to realize that perhaps the central construct is the ability of the would-be entrepreneur to inspire confidence and trust in those who can collaborate with her to solve the problem being posed and addressed. Now that's true in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a much more developed setting than the developing world where I normally hang out for my academic work. But it's much more important in Bangalore or Bogota, places like that, primarily because it's very hard to modularize a problem and say, I, as a would-be med-tech entrepreneur, for instance, I'm just going to go and make my own medical device, and then I let society deal with the other aspects of it. The truth is that the med-tech entrepreneur, just to take an example, is going to have to work on property rights much more than he would have to in Boston. He's going to have to work on talent generation, on educating the healthcare institutions in the country much more than, again, he would in Boston. So he's going to have to take on the responsibility of building the underlying conditions to help him to succeed as a medtech entrepreneur. He simply doesn't have the luxury to say, you know, I'm just going to be a domain specialist. I'm going to focus on medtech. I'm a life scientist or an engineer, what have you, and I'll just do that. And then somehow societal mechanisms will work to take my innovation to the rest of the world. The extent to which that's untrue is far greater in the developing world than it is in the Boston environment.
Why do you think it's important to focus on trust?
So trust, very simply, is the glue. I keep saying in the book that the entrepreneur in the developing world can't just create. She's got to create the conditions to create. And that's a phrase that, to me, captures really what's going on in the book, that we're profiling people who are in agribusiness, we're profiling people in finance, we're profiling people in biometrics, in healthcare, in a whole bunch of different settings, in China, India, Brazil, Mexico, other places. And in all cases, what the entrepreneur eventually finds, that if she wants to have an impact at scale, not just solve a tiny problem in a particular local community, nothing wrong with that, but if the aspiration is to solve the problem at scale, affect millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, billions of people even, then you're going to have to think about a way to partner very extensively with other people in a society where the partnering mechanisms are underdeveloped. That's another way to say it. And when I say create the conditions to create, what I really mean are you have to make it easy for other people to come and partner with you so that you collectively create the ecosystem in which individual entrepreneurship can thrive and scale. And the key to that, I'm convinced that the primary answer to that is to explicitly internalize that I, the entrepreneur, am responsible not just for being the best medtech person but I'm responsible for also fostering these conditions where other people can come and work with me to take my medtech environment and example and take it out to the public. Now, one criticism that I've heard, one skeptical note that I've heard from people is, particularly in, say, Washington most recently, is aren't you putting too much on the shoulders of the entrepreneur? That you're saying that he's going to have to be a heart surgeon, but also have to deal with medical insurance, deal with telemedicine, deal with transporting patients to the hospital settings. And I think that's true. I am putting a lot of impetus on the shoulders of the entrepreneur, much more so than I would have to if the entrepreneur was in Boston. But honestly, that's the most practical answer that I found. It's far more practical than waiting for the government to solve your problem. It's far more practical than waiting for outside capital to come in and magically solve it. Because the truth is that the underlying conditions are missing. Somebody's got to do it. And the entrepreneur is the likeliest person to be able to at least engage in what I call in the book the partial private provision of so-called public goods. Again, that's a mouthful, but the idea is that things that you would normally take for granted in Boston, if they aren't functioning so well, you should not just wait for them to magically appear or waste your time pointing fingers at others or wailing away about corruption or what have you. All those are facts of life, but get on with it and find a way to help others to help you to create the conditions to create so that you can make progress in society.
Now, worldwide, people's trust in big businesses, governments, and institutions is falling. What can be done?
So this is a really important point. Trust, at least as measured in the U.S. and also in other countries. But let me speak about the U.S. for 1 second. Trust in the U.S. Congress is at an all-time low. Trust in the presidency in some segments of society are abysmally low. Trust in business, I think following the 2008 financial crisis, has also remained stuck at a low level, primarily because many people in society feel that those who perpetrated the actions that got us into the crisis got away, if not scot-free, then got away pretty lightly. So trust is at an all-time low. And I think that that's all the more reason why well-meaning would-be entrepreneurs have to internalize that in the miasma of mistrust, in the ambiance of corruption, instability, etc., we have got to take the onus to create trust, because who else is going to do it? It's a call to action, it's a call to arms, and for those who think it's impractical, I have only this to say. Here, these are stories of ordinary people in different countries in the world, many of modest means, who have stepped up and said, we can solve a small problem. They've not necessarily set off at the outset to say, I want to solve a problem for 100 million people. Mostly they've set out to solve a local problem and realized over time that what it takes to scale the solution is to cultivate an ambiance of trust around themselves so that everybody in the ecosystem, of course there's suppliers and customers, but the regulators, the people who work with them, providers of talent, university systems around them say, that guy Gregory is someone we trust. We can work with this guy, even though the environment in which Gregory may be operating in some developing country city is not one that he would characterize as generally trusting or trustworthy. So I think the onus is on us to particularly step up to the plate. So think of it as a call to action.
What was the most exciting or interesting aspect of writing the book? And also along that line, what challenged you the most?
So most interesting. I would say the most interesting thing, when you write a book, at least when I write a book, as I did about 10 years ago with another book, which was sort of a story of my travel adventures, if you will, through China and India. That one was called Billions of Entrepreneurs. This is sort of a sequel to it, if you will. The most interesting thing is engaging with audiences to whom you describe the content of the book, and you have this constant conversation and repartee and back and forth and criticism, constructive criticism. You write op-eds about it, you teach about it, and you learn a lot from that conversation. That was by far the most interesting thing. The tough thing, I guess, is sort of the mirror image of that, which is I have to be conscious that The language systems that people speak in the academy are very different from those that politicians speak, are very different from those that entrepreneurs and venture capitalists speak, and constantly be aware that there is a translation that's going on inside my head, but it also has to go on with the particular audience. So I'm sort of excited to continue that in my sort of so-called book tour that's about to ensue in the months ahead.
Finally, when will the book be available? As we're all very eager to read it.
This is available today. That's why we're recording this today. I've been meaning to record this for a while, but it's August 14th. It's morning in Boston, evening in Asia. And the book, I think, went officially live today on all the usual websites, Amazon in the Western world. In India, I think it's primarily Flipkart and Amazon and so on and so forth. So it's available today. Whoever engages with it in whatever capacity, please write me a note or go to the Amazon or Flipkart site and fill in your comments, your reviews, your criticisms, whatever it is. Remember, I'm an academic, I'm also an entrepreneur, and I've enjoyed taking these lessons and applying them to my own nonprofits and companies in the developing world. And I encourage you to do that and share your insights with all of us who are looking at this video, and create a community so that we can collectively be the agents of change, and we can collectively not just set out to create, but create the conditions to create. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me.